Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight to join us in our efforts to empower diversity in technology with a special focus on women in STEM. We are grateful for your presence and engagement in this extremely important initiative. Before we begin, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to our sponsors, Langara College, Concord Pacific, and Alacrity Canada. Your support is truly invaluable, and we are grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with you on this initiative. I'd like to share with everybody how this evening came about. My name is Nadia Shabani, and I am a Langara student in the Marketing Management Bachelor's Program, taking a course in event planning with Erin as my instructor this semester. As a major part of the course, we were required to create an event. I realized there was an opportunity to combine my passion for DEI, empowering young women, and making impactful change to support the career advancements of future generations. We need to create a more equitable business world. Being able to cultivate a powerful team of 3, I was able to then believe in my own vision as I was empowered by my wonderful team. My vision was to create a more inclusive and equitable technology industry that provides equal opportunities for women. After a lot of hard work, talking with a lot of people, I now know that fundraising is a full-time career. All of you here tonight are part of the launch of our initiative, Empowering Diversity in Technology. The bigger vision is the continuance of having conversations with change makers leading to impactful, real-time change. Tonight's event is focused on women in STEM, and our goal is to celebrate and highlight the contributions and achievements of women in this field. Through meaningful conversations, we aim to explore the unique challenges and opportunities that women face in STEM, and create pathways to empower and support women in this field. Our moderator for this evening is the wonderful and very talented Maureen McKinnon, who is the founder of McKinnon Executive Coaching. Maureen is a seasoned executive coach and an expert in leadership development with extensive experience working with leaders in the technology industry. We are so fortunate to have a distinguished panel of experts joining us tonight. Our panelists include Kelsie Priest. Yes. She's the director of Winset Center and co-founder of Women in Consulting Engineering Vancouver. Lauren Kelly, the director of Sector Transformation at the First Nations Technology Council. And Rochelle Grayson, founder of Mosaic Accelerator and executive in residence with New Ventures BC. Once again, thank you guys so much for being here tonight, and we hope that you find this event engaging and informative. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you coming out and helping support Nadia and the team and their initiative for for empowering diversity in technology. I know that they were absolutely thrilled and a little stunned that the URL was available for empowering diversity in technology. So guess who now owns it? So we see a big future from this initiative moving forward for all of them and for women in STEM and women in the business world and everyone else in the business world to be in a better, more equitable place in the future. So ladies, I'm going to allow them each to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with the questions. So Nadia gave a pretty good introduction for myself. The only other thing that I like to share, because I see some of the guys in the room, is I'm a huge BC Lions fan. And I know G. Roy Simon and Travis Lulay and Wally Wano. So, and I spent a lot of time with BC Lions and stuff. So I like football. I also have 4 brothers, and they're terribly jealous that I know all these people. So it's lovely. So, Kelsie.
Unfortunately, that's a little lost on me. Is this working? I don't know who any of those people are, but I'm sure they're very impressive.
That's fine, yes.
So my name's Kelsie Priest. I'm a structural engineer at Glotman Simpson Consulting Engineers. I work on a lot of residential projects here in the Lower Mainland, as well as in Seattle and Los Angeles. On the side, I'm also a director for 2 nonprofits. I am a co-founder and a co-chair for Women in Consulting Engineering. Now, this is an organization that I found was necessary for me to be successful in my career because of the lack of women in engineering. There was quite a time when I was the only female engineer at my workplace, and it was pretty isolating. So we've built this really amazing community of over 500 women and allies, and we get together about once a month. It's really incredible. If you know any women in engineering, please tell them about us. And my other nonprofit that I'm part of is Women in Science, Engineering, Technology, and Trades. And this is a national organization. Together, we offer courses that help train women to succeed in the set workplace. And we also help prepare employers so that women can be successful in their workplace.
No? Oh, there we go. Hey, we did it. Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. I just want to start by acknowledging the shared territory that we're on today, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, whose territory we're gathered on, and just really grateful to be on this territory and be able to come together and connect on that territory every day, and especially today. Myself, my name is Lauren Kelly. I identify as a uninvited visitor to these territories, aspiring ally, and white woman of privilege. My family comes mixed European ancestry, and I grew up in Stalo territory in Chilliwack, and I now reside on Tsleil-Waututh Nation territory. I have the privilege of working at the First Nations Technology Council, which is an Indigenous-led not-for-profit organization here in BC. An incredible group of people working to achieve digital equity. There are, I was joking earlier before this that one of my colleagues is here and she's incredible at talking about digital equity, and I always get really nervous about talking about it in front of her. I'll do my best, Ria. Really about actually changing the definition and really bringing awareness to this isn't just about access. It's not about infrastructure or having affordable access to the internet, that First Nations in BC are rights holders. And when we're talking about connectivity, when we're talking about the digital future, Indigenous people and First Nations people here in BC, are rights holders and should be related to as such in the design of the digital future. So a lot of our work is around achieving digital equity and ensuring that Indigenous voices are part of the design of the digital future. We do a lot of work in skills development. We've had over 1,400 people go through our programs in the last years. And I lead a division called Sector Transformation, and I get to work a lot with our industry partners around the conversation starts from hiring Indigenous talent, and I always like to work it back to colonialism and racism and oppression as the actual reasons that we don't have Indigenous talent underrepresented in the tech sector. So get to have a lot of spicy conversations in my day job.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rochelle Grayson, and for many of you, or some of you, you've actually been my students, which is really nice to finally see you because I think most of it's been virtual. I will be, I guess. I teach. I have taught at Langara for the past 10 years. As of April 30th, I will no longer be doing that because yesterday I actually launched a new accelerator called Mosaic Accelerator, which is an accelerator to help women of color and marginalized women build tech-enabled businesses. And specifically, I'm focusing on women who don't have tech backgrounds. So the idea here is to really focus on the other women that often aren't spoken about. In terms of my own background, my undergrad degree was in German literature. And I do have an MBA in finance, so I come from a business background, and that's what I've taught most of my career. I've lost count, 7 or 8 different startups, all in the tech space. I've had successful exits, I've raised capital, I've had some fail and implode, I've had others that have turned into lifestyle business, I've seen it all. So based on my own experiences, I'm now looking to pay it forward and to build a community of women of color in the tech space who feel perhaps that it's passed them by or that they're not competent to be in that, and to really make sure that they have the support they need to do that. So I'm really excited. I launched it yesterday, so It's a fairly new initiative. And this is also a call out to anyone in this room. If you are thinking of starting a business and there's some piece of it that's tech, an app, a website, a customer portal, please check out mosaicaccelerator.com and apply, because we have a program, a 9-month program. It's free because I have funding to do that. And I'd love to support anyone who really has a vision of doing something amazing in their communities.
Well, thank you, ladies. So I wanted you to know that these questions that I'm posing to our panel have been given to us from the team after they've done their research on STEM. So we want to honor them, of course, and we actually talked about the questions. So this isn't a surprise to these ladies, which is great because now they've had some time to think about the answers. So we're going to start with Kelsie.
I know, I like keep wanting to like share screen and put my notes up on that. But they're here.
That's okay. That's okay. This is a safe place, correct? Everybody's happy to be here, right? Okay, so Kelsie, this is a really good one. Do you believe that the greater salary transparency will help to close the gender pay gap in STEM fields? Why or why not? And the context, the BC government has taken another step towards addressing the gender pay gap by introducing new legislation to promote greater salary transparency.
Absolutely, 100% yes. I am so excited by the news released by the BC government last week. I cannot tell you how many people I sent it to because I was so glad to see this. I find a lot of private industries, such as the one that I work in development. I'm in engineering consulting. I've talked to my employer about potentially doing a pay equity study. They aren't against it, and yet it hasn't happened. For private industry, pay is a competitive tool. A lot of them don't want to disclose income or salaries. And it's always a little bit awkward to ask people, like, oh, what do you make, to try and find out where you should stand. And I think that pay equity studies will really be the thing that help bring us closer to closing the gender pay gap. If you talk to employers, they generally say that they promote and they pay people based on their merit. We wonder, is that 100% true? Are they evaluating people correctly? There's a really interesting study done in the US that kind of showcases why pay transparency is so important. There were 2 resumes sent out to science professors at universities across the US. Some of you may be familiar with the study already. There's Jennifer and John, and they were sent to all these professors, and the professors were asked to evaluate the 2 candidates for the salary that they would propose and how hireable they are. And across the board, the professors, they determined that John should be paid just over $30,000, and they determined that Jennifer should be paid $26,500. John was considered to be more hireable and more competent. He was more likely to be offered mentorship opportunities. The crazy thing is, they were identical resumes. The only difference was the name at the top. If you talk to these professors and ask them, well, how did you evaluate them? They'd probably say they used merit, just like my employer says and like a lot of our employers say. So what's happening here? This is unconscious bias coming out into play. And I find it quite frustrating that this happens in our industry. And the studies are showing that this is true. The Federal Pay Equity Commissioner of Canada, she reported that the pay gap in STEM professions is between 17 and 21%. So the data is telling us that this does exist, and how do we get rid of it without legislation? I think 100% yes, this is the best thing to happen for pay equity in BC.
That's good. Yes. Would either one of the panelists want to add to that?
I just want to say that literally today in my LinkedIn sort of newsfeed, there was someone who said she saw her job. You saw that, and her job was basically being advertised. Her company was advertising to hire someone in her job, and she noticed that the pay, there's now the transparency, and the pay range was $32,000 to $90,000 more than what she was currently getting paid, and so she applied. Because she was like, I'm going to apply because I'm doing this job and this is a lot more money than I'm currently being paid. So I think that that's just a really great example of that transparency, really highlighting it and highlighting that, we really shouldn't just, just stay with what we're doing, and that transparency is really important, because sometimes we don't even know. We have no clue. And I'm a finance person as well. And so the other thing is compounded interest, if any of you remember from business. If you think about that, whatever, $3,500 discrepancy at the sort of entry level, that happens then over 10 years, we have literally hundreds of thousands of dollars that people are losing out on in terms of income, because even if they all got a 10% raise over some period of time, we're going to see a significant decrease or gap, and that gap only gets bigger over time. So it's really important.
Yeah, exactly. Did you mention the pay bands as part of the legislation? I can't remember, but anyways, the new legislation would be that companies of a certain size have to publish pay equity studies, and there'll be a framework on how they have to do this, and that's phased out over the next couple of years. One of the other things that they've released is that any jobs that are posted publicly will have to have pay bands, and that's exactly what Rochelle was talking about. So potentially I could see a job posted for my job description and have the same experience. I don't know. I've been at my company for over 10 years, so you have to wonder what's going to happen, and I think it's a great thing.
Yes, we'll wait and see. We'll see what's going to happen. Yes. I think it will make people rethink about what they're putting out there, right? And because they might be asked to explain it, right? Okay. Lauren, you get the next question. What are some misconceptions or stereotypes about women in STEM, and how can we work to dispel these myths? And they are myths, correct?
Yes. Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about how, we call them misconceptions, but really they're, stereotypes, and they're rooted in the social constructs that we exist within. And they are so deeply rooted. And I think that, it's not the job of women or any group that has a stereotype to educate everybody on that stereotype to prove that it's wrong. It's everybody's responsibility to really examine what's at the root of that. And I think that's going to be both short and long term in terms of how we actually address misconceptions. So, in the long term, we think about children right now. I see it. I have nephews, and it's so interesting, even going home and hearing the way my family talks to them as boys, and what boys do and how girls are. And, I was raised in a very conservative environment, and I didn't see myself having the career that I have now. And it starts at that very young age with children, and what we start conditioning them into how they see themselves. So long term, I think, we can see how change will take time. And then in the short term around these misconceptions, I think there's a really important role around allyship, and really happy to see some men in the room, because, that is such a key component of this, in terms of when we look at how women are perceived or how men are perceived, and who holds power and who's driving those conversations forward and bringing truths into the light, and it does require allyship. So I think, when we think about misconceptions, we could probably every person, every woman in this room could name, a dozen misconceptions about them and who they are and their identity. But really, we need to walk it back. We need to look at what's the root of it. What do we think about gender? What do we think about sexuality? What do we think about race? And start the conversation from there, and start those conversations with young kids as well. And that will change it over time.
Excellent. Anybody else want to jump in there? Okay. Okay, Rochelle. Rochelle, the next question is for you, and I think this one is really exciting for the students in the group here. Rochelle, what are some of the most promising STEM fields for women to pursue in the coming years? And what are skills and experiences will be most important for success in these fields?
So I'm probably going to sound like the things that you've been hearing a lot about over the last couple of weeks, but I really fundamentally feel that one of the areas that we're going to see an incredible amount of work done is in artificial intelligence in the next couple of years. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I know that your faculty members are freaking out about ChatGPT and everything else. I know that. But beyond that, really what is important to me and something that I see over and over again as a woman of color in tech are the algorithms. And basically, what you need to understand is we are now creating systems, new systems, and we have to be really careful that these new systems don't just continue all of the biases and all of the other things that we've seen in our existing systems, because who's programming them? We are. And so we're programming them based on what we currently think and our current sort of structures and frameworks. So I really want to make sure that women of color, all kinds of basically intersectional people are part of that discussion, because without them being there, those algorithms are going to reflect a lot of the things that we're already complaining about. And it's kind of this black box. So you don't see it. It's just, I type something in and it doesn't happen. In fact, it happened to me most recently. I went to Africa with my father for his 80th birthday. Our whole family went. We had a wonderful family vacation. We took a photo, and in the photo, it was my husband, who's Caucasian, myself, I'm kind of in between my parents, and my father, who's quite dark. And Google Photos identified my husband, identified me, did not identify my father. And I've heard about this, but it was the first time that literally I had a photo and we were standing like this, like side by side. So it wasn't like anything. And I was like, whoa, Now, fortunately, it didn't. I've heard it didn't say he was a gorilla. I've heard that, right? But it didn't recognize him as a person. And that was because Google's algorithm is trained primarily on Caucasian, European, fair people, and they have no point of reference for darker skinned people. So if we're not part of those conversations and we start using these systems and they're doing some amazing things, which they are, I'm not taking that away from them, but who are we going to leave out? And who's not going to be seen? Who's not going to be heard? Who's not going to be represented? So I think we need to be part of those conversations around all of these new digital systems, however you look at them, and make sure that our voices are heard. In terms of the skills that I think you need, some people are like, oh my God, Rochelle, that sounds so technical. I don't know how to do all that coding stuff. I think what's really important as students, there are a couple of skills that I think are very transferable. And it's what I often tell my students. It's, lifelong learning and a curiosity to learn. So please understand that when you graduate, your learning doesn't stop. Okay? I know some people are like, woohoo, I graduated, I don't have to ever open a book again. Nah, wrong answer, right? I want you to continue to learn because there are new things happening every day, and read and be curious, right? Ask lots of questions. Those are things that I think are important for anyone. The technology and the technical stuff actually isn't that hard. Most of us can learn that if we put our mind to it, but really being critical thinkers and also really putting in the effort and the work to do it. The other thing that I think is really important is connecting the dots. One of the areas that I see a lot of things, people are very siloed, and I see this even in our students sometimes. It's like, oh, well, I took that course like three years ago. You expect me to remember what I did in Accounting 101, Yeah, I do, So think about things more holistically, connect the dots, and I think you will do really well. As a visionary, I think you might see opportunities that others aren't seeing because they're so focused on their silo. And I'm a huge believer of intersections. I like to say I'm an intersectional person. So I'm half African American, I'm half Puerto Rican, Latina. I grew up in Germany, I've lived in Africa. I am now married to a white Canadian. I am very intersectional, and that's what makes me see opportunities often where others don't. So think about two different areas that seem super different and put them together, and maybe you'll come up with something really cool. That's where I think the magic happens. So think of Venn diagrams. Anyone remember like the circles? If you don't think of those overlapping circles, that's what Venn diagrams are. Think of those overlapping areas, and maybe there's something really interesting and new that you can explore. And we need people to explore, to be entrepreneurial in your thoughts, even if you think, that's not my thing, Rochelle. Even there are entrepreneurs, and maybe you haven't heard this term, but there are also intrapreneurs who do a lot of entrepreneurial things within organizations. They're the ones who basically start things. So I think if you have that ambition, drive, and can see opportunities, you will do well regardless.
Great. I hope you're all excited and inspired moving forward. Great. Kelsie, this was your question. How can we create a more welcoming and supportive environment for women who are returning to STEM? Now we just launched them, now we're returning them. Or from education or careers after taking time off for caregiving or other reasons?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I've never taken time off for caregiving. I'm not yet a mother, but I have been involved in this space trying to get more people to be included in STEM professions for quite some time now. And there's a couple of things that come to mind that will really support women coming back from caregiving leave. I think of mentorship and allyship, which has already been mentioned. I heard a really great idea on how we can help mentor women coming back into the workforce after having kids. We know that the baby boomer generation is starting to retire now. They're vacating a lot of positions, and a lot of them actually want to go down to part-time before they fully leave. And it's an amazing opportunity to pair mothers returning to the workplace with senior engineers who are leaving the workplace. So they benefit from sharing projects together. There's a lot of mentorship that naturally happens there. And it's really a win-win for both parties involved. And I hope to see more of that in companies. The other thing that I mentioned, allyship, we're really relying on men to help make this transition easier and to help bust some biases that currently exist. Generally, people expect that when a woman has a child, her career is now not her number one focus. She'll be like very family oriented. And that's not always the case. And men can also be very family oriented. But we're not seeing that because men aren't really showcasing that to us enough. What I recommend men can do is you can be very loud about your actions in being a caregiver. So when you leave your office at 3 o'clock, tell people, hey, I'm going to go pick up my kids, or you're going to a soccer game, tell people that. Do whatever you're doing loudly so that you can help bust the biases that you are not a caregiver, because you are as well, generally. So we'd like to see men taking on equal partnerships in relationships and in the home. And I really think that's the key to getting women out of this stereotype that they're not going to be heavily involved in their career anymore.
And I think also it comes down to the systems in place for the benefits. Like how much time do you get off when you're a parent, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a perfect way of phrasing it is parental leave. We shouldn't be thinking about maternity leave anymore. Any employee who has a kid should be asked, will you be taking parental leave? It's not just mothers who are taking time off anymore. I see this at my own company. Men are taking parental leave too.
Yes, excellent. So we're expecting things to start happening. Yes. And as the next generation, we want you to start thinking about getting your voice heard so that it becomes more the norm. And we're switching this particular myth about not focusing on your career as much. I've heard recently of several women who have come back from work to discover that their job's been given away to somebody else, and they have been put into a different role, and they have taken the perception that they're trying to now have them leave the company because they've promoted the other person in front of them. So it really does happen in the real world, so let's see what we can do to make this kind of activity stop, right? Okay. Lauren, here we go. How can we ensure that the perspectives and contributions of women and other underrepresented groups are included in STEM research and development? And what has your experience been like in the field as a woman?
Well, I think first step, invite people into the conversation is a very helpful aspect of that. But I think not talked about enough is compensating, especially underrepresented people in those conversations. I think, there's an incredible amount, when you're the one person of an identity in a group, often that issue comes up and everybody turns to be like, what do you think about it? And maybe somebody doesn't want to do that emotional labor for their workplace and that cumulative emotional tax that people experience. So I think, whether we're talking about panels or events and having speakers, it's incredibly important to compensate people for their knowledge and for their time, and to also recognize, what was required for them to get even in the room that day. So, valuing that knowledge with actual financial resources, I think, is going to be really significant in terms of actually ensuring that those voices are a part of the conversation, whether that's in events or in employment roles. And I think, similar to that, one thing I see a lot in tech is employee resource groups and employee network groups. Joking about this before earlier too is, I see it so often where companies are like, oh, great, we created an employee resource group for a particular identity to gather together, but then they just try to relate to it like an internal consultancy on that topic. And so I think it is really important that perspectives are there, but that people also do the work to be part of the conversation. I talk a lot about, again, from the ally perspective, learning is doing, and taking the action to actually inform ourselves so that we can enter into a conversation to actually hear that perspective, so that we're not starting from a place of, well, first educate me about your history, and then we can make space for your perspective to be part of the conversation. So, allies need to do the work to really get to a place where they can engage in that conversation, and then ensure that those people are in the room by removing certain barriers and making sure that people have that space to share their voice. I talk a lot about allyship. I think about it a lot. It's a big part of my what I want to contribute into the discourse and over my lifetime. And it is really the people that hold power that are responsible for changing those power dynamics. And so if we want to hear different perspectives, it is going to take people who hold the power, who make those decisions, who have the resources to actually create that space to step back. And that might look like talking less, taking less space, or not taking those opportunities and putting somebody else forward for it. So it is such an important part of the systemic change that we want to see, especially if we want it to actually move things and not be a tokenized, inclusion of perspective as well. So big role for allyship to play in making space for perspectives. And then I think there's a lot of work to do to make sure that experience of sharing perspectives is safe and compensated and valuable for those people who are contributing to it.
Great, thank you. And Rochelle, this is a question that we're asking you to go a little deeper from the previous question on what do you think some of the most important skills and traits for success in STEM, and how can female students develop these qualities?
So it's really interesting. In STEM, we often talk about STEM being a lot of analytical abilities and, people who really sort of can take a problem and pull it apart, which is really important. And I would recommend that anyone who has those skills learn how to do that and do that well. That said, there are other parts that I sometimes see. Over the last 2.5 years, I think, I've mentored about 80 different startup companies around sales and marketing. And I am amazed, and these are all tech companies, I'm amazed at how little, and I'm going to be really blunt here, sort of relationship skills they have. And so one of the things that I think is really important is how to build relationships. And when I say build relationships, this is not just, it's building relationships with your customers, it's building relationships with your colleagues, it's building relationships with your vendors. Relationship is a really key piece of everything. So I know for a lot of the students, many of you might be from Langara or other institutions here, you hate team projects. But let me tell you, they are probably the most valuable experience that you can have, and learning how to work with others who are not like you, work with others who maybe have different styles than you, and figuring out how you can make that happen and make it work successfully, and that you as a team need to be successful. That is probably one of the most important skills. And so when, yes, you get into that class and your eyes roll because the professor says we're doing a team project, really take it as an opportunity to learn how to work with a variety of people from different backgrounds. And it's a great sandbox, as I like to say. It's a great practice for what you're going to experience in the real world. Because when you get in the real world, you don't get to choose. I have to, can I choose my team? No. So in the real world, you don't get to choose who you work with. And so learning to work with others, I think, is really important. The other thing that I've learned is don't wait until your senior year to think about employment, or your final year, year 4, year 3. You need to start thinking about it year 1. You should be volunteering, doing student clubs. You should be just reaching out. You should try to find and do things, because when you graduate, I'm looking at all of your experience holistically. What have you done during that entire time? I'm not looking at just, oh, and GPA, yeah, it's important, but it's not actually, it might be important for your first job. That's it. Maybe, and maybe even not that. I get requests, Rochelle, can you recommend a student? I look for students, and they're usually not my A students that I recommend. I usually recommend the B or B plus students who've worked really hard, who have really tried to understand what's going on, who are curious, who are out there going, I will do the work, and and I'm going to really work hard for that B plus. Those are the great students. So work ethic. And the other thing, the last thing that I would highlight is learning to deal with ambiguity. Because we are living in a world of a lot of ambiguity, unknowns. And your boss is not going to give you a list of questions with points and tell you exactly what you need to do. When I get students who are like, well, how much is this? Do I have to remember this for the exam? Your boss is not going to tell you how they're evaluating you. They're going to be watching you all the time. They're going to be watching what your deliverables are. So do your best, and also recognize that sometimes they're just going to say, go create a presentation. That's it. And you're going to have to figure out how to put that presentation together. You're going to have to figure out how to build things and make stuff happen, and maybe communicate with them as you're building it to make sure you're on track, and ask lots of questions. But things change, things are ambiguous, and in some ways, I'm not going to lie, I always feel as professors we might be doing you a bit of disservice by giving you a nice little chart, and this is worth 3 points, and this is worth 10 points, and this is worth da-da-da-da. Because in the real world, nobody's doing that for you. Because if I did that as your boss, I would just do it. I don't need you. Part of it is a mental overhead of coming up with all of those things. And so as a boss, I'm really relying on you to do it and figure out and come up with solutions, and talk to me as you work your way through that. Because it's also not going off in your own and going down a path and finding out that you're going down the wrong path. So ambiguity, I know many of you are really uncomfortable with that. At least I've seen it in my class. I do it on purpose. I purposely don't give you all the answers and see who asks me for questions, because that tells me that this person is thinking through all the possibilities, and that's a good thing. So learn to deal with the unknown, because the only thing I can tell you is your careers are not going to be the same. Literally, who would have thought AI, ChatGPT even was a thing when you started 2 years ago, 3 years? Now, AI has been working and there's a lot going on, but how many of us would thought it's a real thing? It's something that's really going to impact my job, my role. So I really want you to think about, how do you deal with uncertainty? Be vulnerable, be creative, be analytical, and really try to do that in everything you do. And I can't say it enough, continue to learn. There are lots of, I wish I had YouTube when I was young. I wish I had LinkedIn when I was young. I mean, like for me, like trying to network, oh my God, that was hard, like pre-internet, So you guys have some amazing tools, use them, leverage them, and you will do really, really well.
Yes. Excellent, excellent. And I hate to tell you again, like Rochelle, students, nobody ever asked me what my averages were after I graduated, and I worked so hard. and I have 2 master's degrees, and they don't ask me even now, So it really
Fallacy. So literally, it's not about a 4.0. It's about what skills, and it's about what can you provide to them. And here's the other thing. Many of you are also have intercultural backgrounds or international students. Here's my thing. That's a bonus. Whenever I encounter someone with an accent, I go, you are a person of courage, because it's courageous to come to a country or come somewhere and take on and speak in a foreign language and try to connect with others. That's a sign of courage. It's a badge of courage. And you should be proud that you have taken that step.
Yes. I was saying to a group of young women here this evening that as an executive leadership coach, one of the things that I was working with a younger woman, and she mentioned to me, I asked her about her computer skills, right? Not her coding, but her actual MS Office suite, because every employer wants you to have some background in MS Office. And she said, I'm a master. And I said, I'm so proud of you that you could use that word and own it. So we put mastery of MS Office skills on her resume, and it resonated with the law firm that she applied to. She beat 124 candidates to get hired. So this is something that you breathe, live, think about. So make sure that people know you're comfortable. You really are able to pick up software, applications, all of those sorts of things, because a lot of employers, especially the hiring employers and the managers, the more senior managers, they're uncomfortable with technology. And if you don't quite say you can run circles around them and you want their job, that's not what I would suggest. But this is a way that you can claim subject matter expert as a student, right? The other thing too, like international students, I tell my clients that I work with to put their languages right near the top of their resumes. That's a special skill, because in a city like Vancouver, where we are multicultural, that's a real asset if you can do that. Even if it's only conversational, that's still a valuable asset, because you just never know when someone's going to ask them the question in a language that they don't know, right? So
I actually want to add something to this. So I'm an engineer, and we have one basic introduction into coding, but we do use a lot of software in our profession. I took one online university course on how to write macros. It's been really helpful, but I wanted to give a plug for my colleague Simone, who's here tonight. She has taken on software development in our company, and she's also trained as a structural engineer. So she's picking all of this up on her own time, taking extra courses. So if anyone is interested in learning some coding skills, you should talk to Simone, and I bet she could give you some tips.
Simone, stand up, please. And Simone shared with us tonight that she's been given an opportunity to put her own role name for this new position. So I was telling her that she should think about how could she use the title to claim being a subject matter expert at what she's doing, so that she can use that kind of a title when it's on her resume for in the future, that she knows what she's talking about, and that any person reading her resume would know what questions to ask her and what kind of projects to put her in responsible for. Right? Don't just say you're a team lead of computers or software department or software program. Actually indicate what that program or what the results are that you're trying to do is even better. Because you will be then viewed as a person who makes things happen. And entrepreneurs and employers like that, well, most of them. There's the employers who are what we call laissez-faire leadership style, which means that they're hands-off. They're the ones who sit in the office with their door closed all the time, and they don't want you to come and talk to them, because their style of management is they'll only talk to you when there's a problem. They don't all the rest of that, and they want you to try and figure it out anyway. But anyway, fortunately, that there's fewer and fewer of those, I hope, around.
And I agree with Maureen completely. And I would say sometimes, especially when you're starting out and you're young, my mother said something to me that has been true for my entire career, and I'm going to share it with all of you. And often you're like interviewing for a job, and like you really want it, and you think it's really amazing, and it falls through for whatever reason. And my mother has always said, and I've always looked back and she was right, her statement was, "You've been spared." You've been spared, and that there was something there that probably didn't work out. And so to Maureen's point, if you put these wonderful skills and someone doesn't value them and doesn't hire you for them, really look at that as it's probably not a good fit, and you've been spared working for someone who doesn't value you. And that, I think, is really important. And at the time, I know you're disappointed. It's really hard. And I've been there. And my mother said, "You've been spared." I'm like, "Whatever, Mom. Yeah, whatever." I'm pissed, right? But looking back, it has helped me, and I have been hired by people who really get Rochelle. I've been hired by people who really support me, who really have helped my career. And when I look back at those opportunities later on, I'm like, oh, thank God I didn't go there, right? Because it would have been really a mismatch. And again, I like to think of it as a mismatch. Not that they're bad and I'm good. It's just there's not a good fit. And there's a reason why we have millions of organizations and millions of cultures, because we don't all fit everywhere. And that's okay. But hopefully where you do land, you do fit. And that's really, really important. So I want all of you to think about that. When you get to those times of troubles, just think about you've been spared, and there's something probably better in the wings waiting for you. That's going to be a better fit.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's so funny. It's just like the story we were talking about before, and like what it looks like when it is a fit. I applied right after I finished my master's degree. I applied for a job that I wasn't qualified for at all, to be a technology instructor, which I wasn't excellent at technology, nor had I ever taught. But I liked the organization, and I was like, I'll just apply. And somebody saw something in my resume, and I had to prepare a presentation. And I didn't go in and try and pretend like I knew how to do those things. I presented on. It's funny now. I went to a job interview for a technology instructor, and I presented on relational accountability and how to do participatory research and have relational accountability in your research. Not applied at all. But it was a fit because they called me and they were like, "Ooh, something happened?" Oh, okay. They called me and said, "Well, you're not a fit for the technology instructor, but we think that you're a really great fit for our organization, and we want to offer you a position as a communications officer for some community engagement we're going to do." And so, that when you do find your fit, they'll see your skills. But I showed up. I'm really proud of how I showed up authentically in that interview, and I didn't try to pretend. And I found my fit, and I've been there for 10 years. So,
Yes. You just never know. You just never know. People can surprise you. Now, this is our last question before we open it up to question and answers to the group. And it's not for any one of you. It's for all of you, or whoever would like to. I'm going to toss it. You catch it. Run with it. Okay. What advice would you give to, I'm throwing the ball your way. What advice would you give to women who are struggling to balance their personal and professional lives, particularly in fields where long hours and high demands are the norms? Not that any one of you have ever experienced any of that. Okay, who's first?
Okay. Engineering's a pretty demanding field, especially working in the private sector. We do work long hours sometimes, and it is very demanding because we work for developers who can give us any deadline they'd like, and we're a customer service industry, so we try and meet those deadlines. It is really tough sometimes, but what really helps me is having a community, having friends who are also going through the same thing. So make friends with your colleagues. It's also part of the reason why I feel so proud of Women in Consulting Engineering, because we are a community, and you can show up to an event and talk to almost anyone there and really relate to each other on some of the demands that you're facing, the possible burnout. And it just takes this really challenging thing, and it's something that you can instead bond over. So yeah, find your community, find your support, and also try and get outside and go in nature. I find that really helps me too.
I would say I'm really lucky to work for an organization that sees a whole person. It doesn't mean we haven't worked really long hours. I've submitted proposals for funding at 9 p.m. and it didn't go through, and it's Eastern time and you're freaking out. So I've worked hard. I've worked long hours. But one thing that I've actually said this to almost every team that I've led, is because we're doing hard, we're challenging systemic racism and oppression and colonialism, and what we're trying to do as an organization is it is hard work, and it is some days you're just lay down on the floor. But I like to bring a lot of laughter and fun into the work and say, what we're doing is hard, but the way we do it is also can be fun. And we're met with these really big challenges. And it is, going back to what you were talking about, curiosity and mindset, if you can see the problem and approach it as like, okay, well, this is challenging, but how can we address this? It is a mindset shift and sort of a, context that you create around the work. And one thing I always try to do is I like humor. I like to laugh a lot. You might have noticed. And I try and do that in the work and with my teams. I'm sure that not all spaces are accommodating to something like that. And I do feel lucky to be in a space where I can create that. But I think bringing a mindset of positivity to the work is something that really helps me balance through those hard moments. And, some of those hard moments look like, sitting in a meeting with somebody in a tech company saying really racist things and having to, really challenge them. And it can be exhausting, but at the end of the day, then I go back to my team and make fun of it. So it's hard work, but I think you can bring a different mindset to it.
And I would just, I think the other thing that I would say is sometimes I find, I'm going to say even as women, we fall into sort of the victim sort of mentality. And so when that happens, one of the things that I've done is I've actually tried to own it and tried to actually control it. And what I mean by that is I started my career in investment banking. And if any of you guys have ever heard about investment banking, we put in long hours, and that's like a badge of honor. It's not even that you have to, but it's just like, oh, I did 100, oh, I did 110, I mean, it's that kind of competitiveness, right? And there is a lot of wasted time, but that's how the badge of honor. And at one point, I was working really hard, long hours, and I just started telling my boss, you do know I was here till 2 a.m. last night. You do, and I was here till 2 a.m., so when am I going to get time? When am I going to get that time back? And I asked him straight out, like the next day, I was here till 2 a.m., that's what we needed, but when am I getting that time back? Is it this weekend? Can we please put it in writing? Like, really, you're also in control of your balance. And if you just let things slide, then people are going to take advantage of you because you haven't stood up for your boundaries. We have to set boundaries, and we want to be flexible. I want to be flexible. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, but it's give and take. And if I give you something, I'm going to take something back. So part of it is really, so that's why I'm saying, like, own it, document it, deal with it in the moment. So don't also wait till like 3 months later. Well, I did that thing 3 months ago. And it's like, well, you didn't say anything. Tell them then, don't be bitter. You can be cordial, you can be collegial, but I definitely recommend that you tell them, this is what I've done. I'm really happy about it. It was necessary, but when am I going to get that back? Because if you let it slide, you'll never get it back. You'll never get it back. And I know some of you are like, well, I'm a young person and that's what I have to do. I have to pay my dues. I actually think everyone in this room, if we start doing this consistently, we can stop that behavior. And the people who continue to do it are actually enabling the people above us to continue to do that with others. So recognize that when you do that, maybe you're not thinking it's affecting you, but it's affecting the person they hire next year, next month, because then it's like, well, Rochelle didn't say anything and she did it. And so did it and they were fine. So why are you complaining? So the sooner we stop, the sooner we all can improve and do better.
Excellent. Now we're going to open up to question and answers, and you can direct your question at one of the panelists or just in a general question. Who's going first? Now, I know that we must have posed and opened up your minds a little bit about what we're trying to do here with our conversation. So come on in and join the conversation. And if not, I'm going to pick on Nadia. No? Okay. Although transparency is a good step, right?
Dare I say allyship?
Okay, then, all right.
I can add to it. I can add.
Okay,
I think
please.
that to actually move the dial, I think we do it's not surface level interventions that are actually going to change diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is looking at it from a systemic change perspective. And what's at the root of those systems is racism, is colonialism, is white supremacy. Big terms to talk about and unpack. And a colleague that I work with saw something online. It's like third party, but it's really helpful analogy, I think, for understanding kind of what we're approaching. And they said that white supremacy isn't the shark, it's the water. And so until we recognize that it's actually the water that we're trying to change, we're not actually going to move the dial. We'll, maybe make a little bit more space for a few more people to come in the room. But until we actually address what's at the root of all of our systems and actually create systemic change at that level, it won't shift. We need allies.
Oh, I was just going to say that one of the other things I think that is happening and I'm seeing is that when the original structures for companies were developed, there was no model because it was the industrial age that was brand new. So and not everybody was kings, so they couldn't use that model, and they certainly didn't want to use serfs. But the only other model really around was church or military. So they went with military, and that's why we have the hierarchy. And it was in the early 1920s and stuff like that, that the responsibility for the presidents and the senior management was their people. That's what they were supposed to be taking care of and making sure that the people were looked after, given opportunities for growth, etc. It's when the investment climate came into where the stakeholders became the focal point of doing business that all of a sudden the presidents and senior managements were now tied to the bottom line rather than the people. There is, because of with social consciousness and social responsibility, et cetera, and we see it here on the West Coast, there is a big movement to change that, to stop being so responsible to the stakeholders. And once again, the senior management is going to be responsible for the people, to give them opportunity and open it up. I hope that this is a movement that is moving forward. And I think that if any way that we can help move this message, that this is what we need, and we can still get the work done and I can still make money, but I would like to see this as it's sort of like the new leadership roles of servant, and those kinds of leadership styles are happening, and I'm happy to see that that's actually happening.
I think for me, it's kind of interesting. I know there's been a lot of talk, so I'm going to be probably fairly tactical. The DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I feel that, unfortunately, in some ways, we need to start backwards. I actually feel that the most important one is inclusion. And when I say that, I'm not saying that diversity and equity isn't really important. It is, but I've been, the token. I always say, like in the States, I always laugh. I'm like, I'm a woman, I'm Black, I'm Latina. I check a lot of boxes, right? So, but did I feel welcomed? Did I feel included? And I think that's, for me, often the bigger question to ask when I talk to any kind of diverse or corporate client. It's like, does your team feel empowered, and do they feel included? And if they don't, there's a really fundamental issue somewhere. And it's that systemic racism, it's there. So I agree with what Lauren says, that's exactly it. But we often don't have discussions around inclusion. We have discussions around diversity. Oh yeah, do you have, does it look right? We talk about equity is a little bit harder sometimes for people to get their heads around, not equality, but equity and what people actually need to achieve similar outcomes. Very different, and people are starting to have that conversation. But I feel sometimes it's also a little bit easier to say, so do they feel included? And often this is where colonialism shows up big time. Because oh yeah, they're included. I invited them to the golf match. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do I play golf? Do I care about golf? Is that my community? Thank you for the invitation, but I don't feel included. I feel more like the caddy than the actual player, right? So I think, you start asking about what inclusion looks like, and it really unlocks, in some ways, a lot of people's biases and a lot of their ideas of what inclusion is. And that's when I start peeling the onion sort of back a little bit, all the layers. And so I often am trying to have conversations with people around inclusion, not just diversity. And here's the other thing, diversity is not just this. There's diversity of thought, there's diversity of experience, there's a variety of different kinds of diversity. So let's just stop making like the racial one or the gender one, because there's a whole nother area. And I've been in some rooms where it's a bunch of white men, but there's one guy there who thinks very differently from the rest. And we can't just say, okay, all people with a broad brush are one or the other. So let's also dig deeper around that question as well, because diversity doesn't always look like you think it is. And I've had some Black friends who are more conservative than the most conservative people out there. So just because you look a certain way doesn't mean that you necessarily espouse certain views.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadia. Is there anyone else who is courageous enough to ask us a question? But not to worry, because the purpose of this evening is so that when we're finished the panel, this discussion will continue at your tables tonight. We have someone brave enough. Well, as a professional mentor, I have actually mentored and coached hundreds of professionals here in the Vancouver area. I have been involved in at least 6 different mentorship programs officially. I've helped set up 1 or 2 of them. The first one I did was I was involved with the Leaders of Tomorrow mentorship program through the Vancouver Board of Trade. I chaired the program for 2 years. I was involved as a business mentor for 7. I was a business mentor with New Ventures business plan for 12 years. I'm a part of the Women in Leadership Foundation currently, the Vancouver co-chair, and I sit on their mentorship program and help with them mentor. I still am in touch with my very first 2 mentees from the Leaders of Tomorrow mentorship program back in 2000. So it's been really interesting. Mentorship itself has changed what we expect and what we would like to see mentorship be in today's world. There's a lot of mentorship in organizations now that didn't exist before. I'm so happy to see there's so much more mentorship programs and availability to women, particularly in Vancouver. I've run across at least 3 new ones each year in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's amazing. I see it now in industries like your group, right? And that sort of thing. I think depending on if the mentee understands that you actually can lead what you need from us, because we can't read your mind. As much as I would, well, maybe not. So you can do that because we know a lot, we've done a lot, we know a lot of people. So these are kinds of things that mentorship can offer you if you have an idea about the help that you need or would like. And in almost all of these mentorship programs, if I don't know someone in your industry that you're looking for, one of the other mentors will, and they will help, right? Rochelle, you must have done some mentorship.
Oh, I kind of have a personal experience with how lack of mentorship held me back. Going through high school and university, I was really high achieving. I loved getting good grades, so I was very motivated. And then I entered the workforce, and I've been with the same employer, and I've always been the most senior female engineer since the day I started as a co-op student. And the company set me up with like a life coach in my first year at the company, which was really interesting. And she asked me, like, what do you want to be in this company? Where do you want to grow into? And I literally hadn't thought about growing from a junior engineer because there's nobody like me for me to look up to and see like, oh, I could be a principal at this company. So at first I kind of aspired to be a project engineer. I was like, that's what I could see myself doing, despite being like the top of my class in civil engineering at UBC. And then, so once I kind of talked to this life coach, and then I realized how much not having role models was impacting me, which was one of the driving forces for starting Women in Consulting Engineering, because there are senior women in our industry, but my company likes to promote from within, so they haven't hired anyone more senior to me yet. But it made a really big difference to me, and now I do see myself like I'm actively trying to be an associate, and I'd like to keep on moving up in the company. So yeah, having a role model and a mentor is very, very important. And now I've been giving back by mentoring with the YWCA, working with high school students, because I think having a visible role model in engineering is very important.
So yes, I've mentored a lot, and okay, I'm going to start with my own personal story. Let's start there. I didn't really have very many mentors who look like me. And when I say that, I'm not talking about like literally physically, but I've never had a woman mentor in my career. All of my mentors have been men, and interestingly enough, all my mentors have been white men. And I was saying earlier, and I'm going to use this thing, the number one mentor, because I told you I'm a German lit major and a business person. So people are like, Rochelle, but you're so technical and you did tech stuff. How did that happen? Well, my greatest mentor is actually my husband, who is a software architect with 40 years of experience. And he has literally helped me when I was like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. He's been my trump card, and he's really helped me and has had patience and teaching me the parts I need to know. Like I always say, I know enough to be dangerous, right? I'm not really good at anything, but I know enough that I can kind of get stuff done. And he's been an incredible inspiration, and he's been very patient with me, and he's really helped me with my career. I also had a boss early in my career. I mentioned I grew up in Germany. I worked for Siemens. This was a German white male, like so very conservative, and I still am in touch. Like I've known him for probably closing on 35 years now, and he really mentored me at the time and sort of gave me actually some hard stuff. He was like, "You will never get very far in Siemens he's like, your German is perfect, you speak it fluently, but you're a black woman. You'll never get into leadership here. Just understand that." And sometimes it's really important to have also mentors who give you like that hard, realistic, like this is the reality. I also want to say like sometimes it may not be what you want to hear, because that's the other thing. Some people are like, oh, mentors are going to tell me everything I need to do. And sometimes they're going to say, no, this is the reality and this is the challenges. And you've got to figure out a way how to maneuver that. I've also mentored lots of people, lots of startup founders, lots of small teams. What I'd also like to say is I learn as much from them as they learn from me. And to Maureen's point, the best mentorships are ones where the mentees recognize that they really drive it. Like you can drive that relationship. And like, I know a lot of crap. I know a lot of stuff, but I don't know what you need to know. So if you can really come to me and say, here's what I need to know, or here's some questions I'm having, or here's where I'm struggling, I can really then draw on my own experience and kind of help you navigate that. But then there also have been times where, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but there's also reverse mentoring. And reverse mentoring is where they actually pair people who are very senior with younger people, because back to Maureen's point, we're old. Like we don't know stuff. We don't know crap, right? Like things were different when we were coming up. So there are a lot of things that that are part of today's business world that we need to understand. And like I use my nieces and nephews. I'm like, okay, explain to me this TikTok thing. Like, I don't really get it, like explain to me, but it's also wonderful because they can show their expertise. And when I say, I'm joking, but I'm not, because none of people my age, unless they have small kids, are on TikTok, right? So I have no reason to be there. And if I am, it's kind of creepy, right? So if I really want to understand what's going on and why this is a cultural trend and why it's important, I have to actually engage with also younger people. So understand you have something to bring to the table too. But navigating politics, navigating salary negotiations, navigating perceptions, performance reviews, a lot of those things I found really helpful to talk to someone else and have them help me present myself authentically, but also with authority. Because sometimes, I mean, we haven't talked about imposter syndrome. I know it's kind of been in the elephant in the room, but we all have it. And so I've had some really amazing people saying, no, you deserve it. You've earned it. You should go for it.
Well, do you have something to add, Lauren?
Do we have time?
We do have just a little bit more time.
Okay, sure. I'll share a little bit. I wouldn't be where I was. I would not be on this stage if it hadn't been for mentorship, and a couple things about that. I think I was very lucky to have a mentor that saw me as a whole human, and I think that we need work mentorship and to have the confidence to ask for these things, to step into the roles that we're being invited into, and then there's just the skills aspect, and somebody who's maybe creating. Give it if you work with them and they create a project and you take it on. And they support you when you fail it. I think that what was really beneficial, though, was this person saw the dragons I was slaying in my professional life was actually the same dragon I was slaying in my personal life. And the self-limiting belief that I had that was showing up in the workplace was actually the self-limiting belief that I had been conditioned or raised into from a young person. And I think that their ability to just really see that not just at a professional level or an intellectual level, but at an emotional level and what I was struggling with as just a person, enabled the mentorship to really address some of those underlying challenges I was experiencing and really build up my confidence from that place so that it wasn't fake it till you make it. It was, what's really underneath there, and let's talk about that. And I could, really have those authentic conversations about, what was scaring me or what I actually believed, and really get real. So that was an incredible aspect of the mentorship that I received, was getting a full human being seen that way. And I would say that going back to the earlier conversation around those skills and that mindset and the curiosity, I'm really proud of also being able to receive that mentorship and being coachable and approaching challenges with that mindset. Oftentimes I showed up in the organization again with not a lot of hard skills. And my mentor, my boss would be like, hey, can you go build this? And I'd be like, okay. And I'd have no idea what I was doing. And I would go Google things and I'd look it up. And so I'm really grateful for the mentorship I received. And I'm really proud of how I allowed that to be invested in me and had an open mindset about that. So that's my mentorship story.
Let me share one little story with you with one of my mentees. We had been working together for a year, and we got her hired in a new job at the roles that she wanted, the pay that she wanted, and we were having these discussions, and she was saying to me after, she said, I don't think I'll ever make $100,000. And I said, excuse me? Like, why do you think that? And she said, well, nobody in my family's ever made that. Nobody I come from's ever made that, that sort of thing. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, that's a self-limiting belief that you can't make $100,000. So, of course, the next job we got her was 110. And then the next one was 125, and then the next one was 145. And this all happened in 18 months. And I said to her, how are you feeling about it now? And she said, Maureen, I can see 250 in my future. So, thank you so much, ladies. Thank you so much. Would you please thank Rochelle, Lauren, and Kelsie here for their incredible time, effort, energy, and we'd love to hear your stories. And the fact that you are also all positive about we are actually moving the needle, slow as we are actually still moving it forward. Ladies are going to...
Before you sign off, let's thank you, Maureen, for your moderation and for being the glue and for sharing your insights. We stand on your shoulders, and we really want to thank you for being here and for supporting all of us in the room. So thank you.